I've said this before when it comes to emo as a genre, but there were certain bands that made it work and certain bands that didn't. Then there's those bands that catch more success with it, and those were bands that were hit and miss for me. Forming in Mesa, Arizona in 1993, Jimmy Eat World was sadly a miss for me. I heard a few of their songs that came on TV, but I wouldn't call myself a super fan. However, part of the reason that I do backtracking in the first place is to discover what I do or don't like about bands that I'm unfamiliar with. And for a band mostly labelled emo, I'm aware of the band's shifts in sound over their 26-year-long career. It just happens that my job is to tell you fine folks if those choices were good or bad. Now, let's face the music. We start with Jimmy Eat World's debut album titled Jimmy Eat World. Released in 1994, it came out through the Wood and Blue label, and it's the only album in the band's discography that I couldn't find a producer for, so let's just do what we normally do and say that it was the band themselves. Some background is due, I think, if mostly because it's overdue from previous episodes. So the band's lineup at the time was lead singer and rhythm guitarist Tom Linton, lead guitarist Jim Adkins, bassist Mitch Porter, and drummer Zach Lind. This album is also the only one to feature Mitch. Now, most people know Jim as lead singer and Tom as the rhythm guitarist, but before that their lineup was a bit different, and Jim's only lead vocal role here is on the song Usury. It also explains the confusion behind the band's name, as many people think that it comes from Jim himself, but instead comes from Tom's younger brothers named Jim and Ed, who would fight with Jim usually winning. To get him back, Ed drew a picture of Jim as a monster eating the planet, and thus the band's name was born, because it came with the caption of Jimmy Eat World. There you go. So technically speaking, the name comes from the lead singer, just not the lead singer that everyone thinks that it is. Tom's brothers are actually the cuts on the album's cover too, so that's a nice little thing to add on there. However, the lineup wasn't the only thing different back then, as the sound was a lot different too. People know the band as the more emo-focused force they are today, but their self-titled album has a huge old-school punk feeling to it. I know it came out in the early to mid-90s, and I wasn't even 2 years old by the time that this album was officially released, but still, I listened to this and it was like listening to something that Rancid or Jawbreaker would have released at the time. It's a weird line to draw now, but back then, I don't think it would have been as weird to say that. Also, for an album that's 25 years old, it's surprisingly well produced, which is saying something considering that this album went out of print really fast. In a way that helps, as I often like to find the most bare-bones versions of albums for this series, and it doesn't get more bare-bones than an album like this. Which again is odd, as one would expect albums like this to get re-released 10 years later, but with better production value. But hey, that just suits me just fine. The overall sound is very punk, with some emo showing through to combine with it, and the structure is fast for the most part, but evened out when it needs to be. The lyrics cover family, love, and sadness, so nothing new, but presented uniquely enough. And that is thanks to the band themselves. Tom's vocals are raw and punchy, as are his riffs, just fast and sharp. Jim's guitar work has good riffs and some nice solos too. Mitch's only appearance has good bass work with nice licks and grooves. And Zach's drumming is speedy and balanced and pretty good. Standout songs include Patches, House Arrest, Splat Out of Luck, Crooked, and my favourite, In Scientific. The band's debut might not be anything new, and it's a shame that it didn't do as well as it did, but it's short, sweet, catchy, and it has a good sound to it. I can recommend this one, even though I get why most others probably wouldn't, but yeah, I actually quite liked it. We then reached the band's second album, Static Prevails. Released in 1996 through Capitol, it was produced by former Drive Like Jehu drummer Mark Trombino, Wes Kidd, and Jimmy Eat World themselves. It's also the first to feature the band's current bassist Rick Birch. Also, fair warning, Mark will make a lot more appearances during this two-part episode. Get it? Got it? Good. One interesting thing with this album is that the vocals here are split between Jim and Tom, as opposed to Tom taking the lead for their debut, or Jim taking the lead for every other album after this one. Now, although their debut went out of print, the band toured like all mothering hell to make a name for themselves, carving a name in the indie and emo scenes and refining their sounds a bit more during that time, which can be heard here. They also recorded a lot during that time too, and that mixed with their touring got Capitol Records' attention. The band were offered a deal in mid-1995, and they were soon in the studio making their sophomore efforts. During the time of recording and touring, the band took a few notes from a little-known emo band named Sunny Day Real Estate, whoever they are, and became inspired by them to chase their own more natural sound. They started experimenting with it, no longer being a punk band with some emo influences, but actually mixing the genres together a lot better than on their debut. Granted, it's not a super huge shift, but I don't think that's the end of the band. With the Capitol being a major label, it is likely that they wanted Jimmy Eat World to slow down, but the band were more interested in doing their own thing. It's not the worst case of executive meddling, as we'll get to a bit later, but it is still pretty bad and worth pointing out, I think. But the band seems to have a better grasp on what they actually want to do for this album, and the sound is more akin to Alkaline Trio, a fact not helped by the usage of two vocalists. But hey, I like Alkaline Trio, so surely I must like bands that sound like them. Thing is, Jimmy Eat World aren't doing some impression of Alkaline Trio, and they're balancing their genres really well too. They add more melody and pacing to the sound, it's more comprehensible and easy to follow. Now, I do agree with critics that it's not the vastest improvement, but the band did what they could. Not so much stepping out of their comfort zone as much as reaching an arm outside to see if the air feels a bit different. The structure is more balanced and measured out, with good melodies used and a better grasp of tone, and the lyrics cover depression, love, and missing a home life. And the band showcases more charm and earnestness too, which I actually quite like. Tom and Jim's vocals trade nicely, as do their riffs and such. Rick's bass work is fast and groovy, and Zach's drumming is heavy and quick too. Standout songs include Rockstar, Call It in the Air, Robot Factory, Digits, and my favourite, and Caveman. Static Prevails might suffer a bit from outside interference, but it's a good showcase of the band's sound, and shows some growth and depth with some good production too. I can recommend this one. We then reached their third album, Clarity. Released in 1999, it would be the band's last through Capitol. It would have Mark being able to record again, produce rather, and the band's longest album at 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 22 seconds. Now, I have some background, but first I'd like to note that it was recently, at time of writing, this album's 20th anniversary, so woo! Now to the background. When this album was first completed, there wasn't a release date for it, and their A&R guy named Craig suggested releasing an EP. Not long after that, they contacted Vinny from Less Than Jake, who runs Fueled by Ramen, and he was on board with that idea. They released the Jimmy Eat World EP in December 1998, 2 months before the album, and it contained 2 songs on the album proper, in Lucky Denvermint and For Me This Is Heaven. K-Rock Radio picked the former of those 2 songs up and started playing it, and it was even featured in the movie Never Been Kissed. However, this album wasn't so warmly received at the time of its release. Despite its release getting a lot of hype, with the movie appearance helping, the album's release was around the time of teenage pop music growing in popularity, and Capitol basically decided that it was done with Jimmy Eat World, essentially firing them. Basically, screw you, Craig, for maybe keeping that sort of info from the band when it would have been really important. There's executive meddling, and then there's just being a cunt. However, what I like about albums that get this popular is having more to talk about for their songs, so wasn't all bad, I guess. Lucky Denvermint is about Jim going to Vegas with a friend of his, but because he was too young to drink alcohol at the time, he gambled all of his money away and wrote the song based on his feelings of being lost after that. Table for Glasses came about because Jim used to work at an art store, and when waiting for a friend's piece to start, a girl walked over to a candlelit table that was set up already, clearing the area with the dirt on the bottom of her dress. The song Your New Aesthetic was originally more mellow, but it was soon changed into something darker and more aggressive, and it was named Skeleton because of how creepy the riff sounded to the band. And the last track I could find any info for was the last track on the album, Goodbye Sky Harbor, which has the lyrics based on a prayer for Owen Meany, sorry, I wrote that wrong, by John Irving. The album's sound focuses on a more emo style, a more traditional one, with elements of Indian pop punk, and it mixes everything so beautifully. There's even string instruments and minimoog usage, and it's done really well, blending in beautifully with the structure, and it goes to so many places too. It does repeat itself, and it doesn't insult the listener either. The pacing and tone is masterful, and the lyrics covering more personal stuff like love, loss, and friendship is brought across brilliantly, all due to the band, of course. Jin's vocals sound so heartfelt, making him likable and honest with good riffs too. Tom's own work is pretty good too, with the focus on guitar helping him a lot. Rick's bass work is deep and groovy with good timing, and Zach's drumming is balanced, heavy, and paced out awesomely. Standout songs include the title track, Crush, Just Watch the Fireworks, Blister, and my favourite, and Lucky Denvermint. Experimental, boundary pushing, produced beautifully and dynamic as all hell. Clarity is fully deserving of its retrospective critical acclaim, and it's a hallmark in the shaping of emo as a genre. It's a real blueprint album, and I can't recommend it enough. It's awesome. Listen to it. We then reached their 4th album, Bleed American. Released in 2001, it's the only one through the DreamWorks label, yes, that DreamWorks, and it was produced by Mark Trombino and Jimmy Eat World. We also have some guest stars too, as Davey Von Bolen appears on the song A Praise Chorus, and Rachel Hayden of That Dog appears on Hear You Me, If You Don't Cautioners, and the closing song, My Sundown. That was quite a lot of guest appearances for one person. Now, onto the background. Woot. After Capitol dropped Jimmy Eat World around the time of Clarity being released, the band basically flipped a dry middle finger in that label's direction by distributing all of their albums up until that point independently while touring around Europe. And in August 2000, they released a compilation EP titled Singles through the now defunct Big Wheel Recreation label. Also, man, did this album cause a bit of a stir. It wasn't even the band's fault, which was the worst thing. This album was released in July 2001, about 2 months before the infamous 9/11 attacks, and due to that, the band had to change this album's title to just Jimmy Eat World. But it's still listed as Bleed American in most places, and I'm going to call it that to avoid confusion with their debut album. There's even a title track as well, but due to the attacks, that song would soon be known as Salt, Sweat, Sugar. Also, yes, this album contains maybe many First People's Jimmy Eat World song in the middle, but that wasn't my first song. We'll get to that one in just a little bit, actually. Still praise where it's due for the middle, as it is regarded as a classic for good reason. It's a good showcase of this album's sound. It's not as diverse or experimental as Clarity was, with only a bit of synth used on a couple of songs. This is also the first album to fully feature vocals by Jim, as Tom still had a couple of his own tracks on Clarity, but still, that's all a good sign of change, and the departure from Cattrall helps massively. Just listening to this album, I felt like it was a bit easier on the band. There were some songs recorded during Clarity that didn't make it to that album because the band felt like they were too late for that, so they saved those for this one instead, and it still retains what made Clarity so unique through that. This album is more straight up pop punk emo. It's more aggressive in places too, with the melodies within giving it more accessibility without anything feeling watered down from the last one, and it's a good showing of the album's structure. The lyrics cover acceptance of self, family, touring life, and lots of lovely references to bands and songs that Jimmy Eat World grew up listening to. And hell, it's easy to hear their influence, but the band still keep a unique mix of sounds. Jim's vocals are cleaner and sound better, and his solos are really good too. Tom's own riffs are nice and chunky, Rick's bass is deep, thick, and sounds great, and Zach's drumming is heavier and keeps a good timing and pace. Standout songs include the Not title track, Sweetness, Get It Faster, My Sundown, and everyone's favourite, In the Middle. Accessible, kept simpler without feeling dumb, and produced better, Bleed American is enjoyable and surprisingly catchy from start to finish. I can recommend this one. And finally, to end part 1 of this 2-part episode, we cover the band's 5th album, titled Futures. Released in 2004, it would be the band's first through Interscope, and the producer for this one is Gil Norton. We also have a guest star of sorts, as Liz Phair provides extra vocals for the song Work. For those with functioning ears or really good lip reading, you'd notice that Mark Trombino's name didn't pop up. Well, he was on deck for this album at first, but due to disagreements between him and the band, he left. It wasn't really anyone's fault. The band weren't in a good mindset to write new material at the time, and they didn't have a lot ready. And when they actually tried to write songs, Mark wasn't available to produce due to having a busy schedule of his own at the time. See, sometimes the stars just don't align, which is a shame because this album turned out pretty good. It contains my first Jimmy World song in Just Tonight, which I first heard on the Burnout 3 soundtrack. Still the best video game soundtrack ever. Fight me. But yeah, this album is a bit more measured in terms of sound. Like with Bleed American, there's more melody, but this almost contrasts with that one, and that's got a more emotive vibe to it, for lack of a better term. I don't have a lot of touring info, besides the fact that the band toured with fellow emo-leaning juggernauts Taking Back Sunday, so that was a match made in heaven. This album is sort of an epitome of what I feel like most fifth albums are, which is taking what they had before, mixing it up as well as they can. Having a bigger label and a new producer was probably help with that. But yeah, this album has the band's signature heartfelt honesty in the songwriting, and if I were into the band back during my preteen years, I would have had this album on blast pretty much all day, every day. Even 15 years after the fact, this album still sounds really good. It's polished well, it all sounds great. As I've said, this album has more melody, but it has some of the aggressive moments from Bleed American, namely more guitar solos. It has some of the dynamism of Clarity, and the more homegrown feelings of the first two albums, but it's all just retooled into a big blast of emo George awesomeness. I feel like this is one of the band's more pop-punk style albums, which I feel makes sense considering the year that this album came out. The structure has that emo energy to it, with catchy vibes and good pacing, and the lyrics cover topics like pain, loss, addiction, and love, sort of making things a bit darker in a way. And the band lean into that surprisingly well. Jin's vocals continue to be honest and emotive with good range and amazing guitar solos too. Tom's riffs are chunky and heavy, Rick's bass is thick with a nice tone to it, and Zach's drumming stands out a lot too, with good timing and pacing. Standout songs include the title track, intro title track rather, Pain, Just Tonight, Nothing Wrong, and my favourite in Polaris. Futures is a great blend of past work while showing hope for the band's future, and it's easy to pick up and listen to. I can recommend this one, it's really good. So that'll about do it for part 1 of this episode. We'll see you soon for part 2, where I cover the band's last 4 albums from Chase This Light to the most recent release, Integrity Blues. Thank you for watching, you're awesome, bye bye, see you in part 2.